U.S. President Donald Trump gave the Canadian business sector some of his trademark governing style last week. First, he launched a Twitter tirade aimed at the Canadian dairy industry, vowing to protect American interests. Then came a new tariff up to 24% on Canadian softwood lumber imports. If Trump's own tweets and pronouncements were anything to go by, NAFTA was dead in the water. But then came a couple of phone calls, some apparently good conversation, and a change of heart.
Well, I was going to terminate NAFTA as of 2 or 3 days from now. The president of Mexico, who I have a very, very good relationship, called me. And also the Prime Minister of Canada, who I have a very good relationship, and I like both of these gentlemen very much. They called me.
What's your reaction to that statement from the president?
We had a good conversation last night.
And we're going to break that conversation down. Certainly sounds like a win for Trudeau. Donald Trump agreed to renegotiate the North American free trade deal rather than scrap it altogether. But the American president also made clear if the deal isn't to his liking, he will pull the plug. Or so he says. We're back with the Sunday Scrum. Susan Riley, John Ibbotson, and Katie O'Malley all joining me from Ottawa this week. John, is this a win for Canada?
Well, it's a reprieve is a better word for it. And it's very, very worrying because we can see where the American position is now on NAFTA under Donald Trump. In order to keep this treaty alive, it's clear that he's going to want Canada to dismantle the supply side protections for dairy and poultry that have been in place since the 1970s. He's going to want us to entrench some kind of acknowledgement that Canadian stumpage fees for softwood lumber are too low and that they have to go higher. And he's probably going to want some kind of protection for American jobs in government procurement, probably also a watering down of the dispute resolution mechanism. And what is the United States prepared to offer in return? My guess is absolutely nothing. It's going to be a take it or leave it. These are the things we want from Canada, give it to us or we pull out. And then the question is, can the United States pull out of NAFTA simply on the word of the president? Must Congress have some kind of enabling legislation in place as well? That then goes to the courts. That then becomes a matter for lawyers. But the impact of all that uncertainty on the Canadian economy is potentially dire. So it's not good at all.
Okay. Katie, what do you think? Do we have any power in this at all?
Well, I agree with John that the uncertainty itself is enough to really put the economy into a state of flux that is never going to be good. That said, from what we've seen so far, it honestly appears that the Trump White House is sort of setting trade policy and making these decisions on a day-to-day, literally a day-to-day basis, which means things can change radically in 24 hours. I would make no sort of predictions as to what the U.S. position on NAFTA will be in a week, in a month, in 6 months. That is very worrying and it makes it very difficult to plan. But at the same time, I think it's a good reminder that we should probably not panic and assume the worst possible case scenario at every sort of utterance coming out of the White House. John is correct when he says that there are particular demands that I can imagine the United States will put forward. It's not quite true to say that Canada has no leverage at all, because there are also an awful lot of American jobs, particularly in border states, that are pretty dependent on Canadian business and Canadian consumers and NAFTA as well. So it's not quite as black and white a situation as it sometimes is portrayed. And I suspect that Canada will have other allies, not just Mexico, which is also another partner here, but also within the United States. And there are going to be other interests that are sort of leaning on the White House and saying, hey, maybe we don't want to take quite this hardline approach. Here are the reasons why the current the ways that the current NAFTA deal does work for us, and things we don't want to risk losing entirely. So I'm not quite as much of a pessimist on that note.
Well, they're taking the study of NAFTA to see the impact in the economy, Susan. They might just find that that the agreement has been good for the United States.
They might, and there's also Donald Trump's mercurial personality, which we've discussed exhaustively before. Right now, it's a matter of great concern to him, but who knows what'll be a matter of great concern to him 3 weeks down the road. More concerning, I think, is Wilbur Ross, the secretary who will be dealing with this issue. He strikes me, just from media reports, as a dour, humorless ideologue, and he may be harder to move than the president. Just to show how mercurial, how political Trump's approach to this whole issue has been. Last night was the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which Trump conspicuously avoided. In fact, he said he wasn't going to go. There are a bunch of rich people having fun in Washington. Instead, he held a big rally, a pep rally in Pennsylvania, a campaign-style rally. And apparently, according to New York Times this morning, his people were looking for a big news bomb to drop so that all the correspondents would have to put down their knives and forks and get to work. I mean, in other words, a disruptor. And they were going to announce that he was going to rip up NAFTA. He changed his mind, apparently, because of that phone call with Mr. Trudeau and the Mexican president. So then they thought, what do we do then? We still got to get a big news story. They were going to rip up the free trade agreement with Korea. And then wiser head prevails, and they didn't. Just by way of saying, this is gamesmanship, dangerous gamesmanship at the highest level. It's really hard to take seriously as policy. That being said, we do have to be on alert.
Okay, we've been slapped with a countervailing duty on lumber, up to 24%. BC's Christy Clark is calling for retaliation. Saskatchewan's Premier Brad Wall says Canada should have a retaliation list ready to go. John, what impact do you think that will have? Is it time to play hardball?
Well, it's a dangerous thing to do because any retaliatory act risks endangering the Canadian economy more than the American economy. It also risks inflaming this mercurial president who, by the way, tweeted this morning, "I've never seen a psychiatrist," which I don't find comforting for several reasons. Again, I am very worried and concerned, and it's because of that rally in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump has a constitutional need every few weeks to get in front of his loyal supporters and tell them that he's giving them what it is he promised he would give them. And then in the weeks in between, sure, he listens to his advisors and to his congressional representations and to business executives and to other foreign leaders. But the core of Donald Trump's political psyche are those rallies. And he has to go to those rallies and say, I promised you that I would get you the NAFTA that is in our interest, or I'll tear it up, and I'm going to keep that promise. And I think if there's one thing we can say about Donald Trump, and take it to the bank, it's that he's always going to ultimately be faithful to the people that he needs to meet every few weeks, and promise that he's giving them what it is they want, because they're not just his political base, they're almost his psychic base.
That's true.
Okay, let's break down the essence of the argument that Justin Trudeau made to Donald Trump in that phone call Thursday night. Let's take a listen.
I highlighted that, quite frankly, whether or not there was a better deal to come, there were an awful lot of jobs, an awful lot of industries right now that have been developed under the NAFTA context. And a disruption like canceling NAFTA, even if it theoretically eventually might lead to better outcomes, would cause a lot of short and medium-term pain for an awful lot of families. And he, like me, got elected on a platform of helping people, helping the middle class, growing the economy in ways that bring along people who don't always feel like they've had a fair shake.
All right, so Trudeau says even if theoretically it might eventually lead to better outcomes, the canceling of NAFTA, it would cause a lot of short and medium-term pain. What do you make of that first part? Does Justin Trudeau believe that canceling NAFTA could lead to a better outcome? Katie?
Well, I suspect that he would have been thinking renegotiating NAFTA rather than just dropping it entirely. And yeah, I mean, let's face it, up here in Canada, no prime minister and no government has, for a while, seriously campaigned on the notion of just ripping up NAFTA. But there are absolutely criticisms of the deal, and there are things that we think could work better, and there are tweaks that could be made. It is getting rather venerable in its age, so it probably could use a going over. I think that that's probably the approach that Canada and Mexico would like to take this, which is, sure, let's take a good look at it. Let's figure out what's working, what's not working, and see if there are any changes we could make. And maybe, down the line there will be some improvements. But that would happen in a transitional way, and there wouldn't be a potential gap where there was no agreement at all, which is honestly a universe that's it's literally impossible to imagine right now what it would be like if even for a year or two there were no trade agreements at all between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. I don't even know how that would function. It's true that many businesses have just grown up in this environment. It would be like it would be like suddenly moving to another planet. So in that sense, I think what the Prime Minister was trying to stress was this idea that, sure, maybe there are changes we can make that are good, but let's do that in a sensible way and not just tear the thing up and wait to see what happens next.